We'd like to look at the role of the treasurer and some of the financial issues that relate to a board. Basically, the treasurer is an officer of the board, and they have a leadership role in terms of certain responsibilities. Their main responsibilities are identified on the slide, basically ensuring that the financial record keeping is appropriate, even though, again, the treasurer might not be the person directly responsible for the day-to-day record keeping related to financial issues. They need to be in very direct communication with, for example, the staff person who might have the major responsibility and ensuring that there's awareness of any of the issues that relate to the financial record keeping. The treasurer also needs to look at compliance with regulations that relate to financial issues and appropriate involvement of the board in decision making related to these issues. And finally, the completion of the 3010 information return in an accurate and timely manner. Even though they might not be doing all of the components, then they need to ensure that it is done effectively and that they have the kind of a major role in terms of overseeing the final product and making sure the board approves that in a timely manner. Part of the 3010 information return are the financial statements that need to be submitted. And basically there's two types of financial statements. One is called an income statement, which really is a statement of the revenue and expenditures that occur within the charity. Basically how the revenue came in, or what were the sources of revenue, and then how the money was spent or expended. The other submission that needs to occur is something called a balance sheet. And this is really looking at a snapshot of the financial position of the board at the end of the fiscal period. And this really looks at the assets and the liabilities that the board has. These financial records need to be approved and signed by the board treasurer or an authorized director or trustee of the board. Boards are expected to use a consistent accounting method for maintaining their financial records. There are two main accounting methods that are used. One is called cash, in which all of the financial transactions that occur, revenue or expenditures, really need to be paid within the context of the fiscal year. Whereas accrual is a financial process or an accounting process in which revenue or expenditures can be counted towards that year even if it's received after the end of the year. So the commitment is made during that year and therefore can be counted within the confines of the fiscal year. The issue is that a charity needs to use one or the other method and be consistent in the use of that method. One of the critical issues in terms of the 3010 accounting comes into play at the end of the information return. These are the final lines in which all of the financial information is kind of gathered into these lines from line 5000 to 5100. The information return is constructed so that the expenditures are in each of these categories. Category 5000 is really the charitable programs. So any expenditures that relate to charitable programs are placed within that line category. 5010 relates to management and administration. And so the allocation of expenditures to these categories is really critical in terms of the calculation of what we call a disbursement quota. Because ultimately, a charity needs to make sure that most of its resources are directed towards the first line, the charitable programs, not the other lines that exist within the information return. This could include the cost of holding a board meeting or accounting or auditing or occupancy costs for administrative services. But in reality, some of the expenditures that exist in a board might overlap in terms of charitable expenditures and also management and administration. Often a staff member might be, his time or her time might be used for supporting charitable programs, but might also be used for some administrative roles. And so there needs to be a consciousness that say 70% of my time is directed toward charitable purposes, therefore my expenditures, 70% of those expenditures are directed towards the charitable line, and only 30% is directed towards administrative expenditures. CRA expects that this allocation is made in a consistent way and that it's based on a reasonable position in terms of how it's allocated. There's other expenditure categories like fundraising expenses and guidelines, and we'll deal with the fundraising guideline later on that CRA has put together, which will help charities to identify expenditures that occur in this category. And again, it's really important that charities don't have a significant amount of expenditures in this category that kind of overlay the expenditures that they should have in their charitable purposes categories. Often the accounting systems that charities use don't correspond directly with the 3010 reporting lines. So many accountants recommend that a charity should look at the expenditures that they have and then line it up with the appropriate line on the 3010, and then also get some professional advice if they have some questions about the appropriateness of where that goes. So for example, on the chart on the bottom, this relates to a church. If you're looking at advertisement of services, then this church has identified that it goes under field 4800 and it's reported on the charitable activities side of the expenditures, whereas the accounting fees would go under line 4860 and would be reported under the management section. So it's really important to kind of line these up ahead of time, and then this becomes a template for simply transferring the numbers over into the 3010 process. Other useful strategies that are recommended: the creation of specific spreadsheets. For example, gifts in kind, because they need to be identified on a separate reporting process, so doing a separate sheet for that, or enduring property, because there's certain rules that apply when a charity disperses that enduring property that year. So keeping that on a separate spreadsheet would certainly help to ease the transfer of that financial information. And the final thing is to really obtain advice around complex issues. There's issues around capital gains reduction, enduring property, non-qualified investment in securities. These are really complex issues, and it's not expected that the treasurer would have this kind of degree of information. So, and again, once this clarity usually occurs, then often the treasurer can continue on to future years understanding the nuances of that direction. And finally, we recommend that using the professional expertise of Revenue Canada. You know, the guide is well constructed in terms of information that's needed on their website. It's really constructed around summary policies, information letters. There's a newsletter to help clarify some of the points of confusion. And there's a lot of forms and publications that one can use. And finally, the treasurer is really expected to kind of spearhead the due diligence of the board in looking at the financial reports, because this needs to be certified as being correct and approved. Then there's the assumption that the board has been involved in the approval processes and has been involved in conversations that might relate to any financial components that might come into play that could, you know, be a problem for the board. So the treasurer really needs to spearhead that communication process and ensure that the board has the appropriate information to make good decisions before it is approved and forwarded to CRA.